Well, all right, so let me tell you where I'm going today. Depends when you're watching this. The last 5 weeks, we've been talking about what it means to be followers of Jesus as a community of people. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about what our specific vision that we believe that Jesus has given us to do. So, let me start here. 12 years ago, a cultural anthropologist by the name of Simon Sinek wrote a book that he entitled Start With Why. And he thought he had stumbled across something really brilliant, which in one hand he had. It's so simple. But he said this as he studied civilizations, more so organizations within civilizations and cultures that lasted for many hundreds and thousands of years, and those that kind of faded, those that thrived and multiplied, and those that didn't. He noticed something about them. Those that thrived, organizations, communities, and so on, that thrived like for long periods of time, had a clear sense of what their why was. And they kept going back to that. When it was pushed on, when it didn't work, when things weren't going well, they kept going back to their why. And he came up with this little target thing with why in the middle, and then outside of that was how and what people did. His point was this: most of us, when we evaluate something, we look at what an organization does and how they do it, but oftentimes it's the why, which is the large part of the iceberg that's under the surface, that's really driving that. At least successful organizations that replicate and are around for a long period of time. So I say he thought it was a bit of a unique idea. He did. He thought it was original to him. What he didn't know, ironically, is that it wasn't original to him, and he got it wrong. Well, he didn't get it all wrong. He just missed the most important part. If we were to start with a book ourselves and call it something, we would say start with who? Start with who? Who informs the why, and then informs the how and the what. But if you don't start with who, you actually get it all wrong when it comes to what Jesus is doing on planet Earth. The last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, we're going to do it again. We've been going to a specific passage of Scripture, a part of a letter, actually, a quote, a paragraph from a letter written by Paul, most influential church leader ever, for sure in the first century. And he writes it to this almost brand new church, trying to encourage them to make sure they get the main thing. They don't get this wrong, because if they get this wrong, they get it all wrong. What's he talking about? What he's so concerned that they as a church community will get wrong is that somehow they'll slip off center and forget that Jesus is the who. There never is a substitute for him. He is who. He is the expression of what the church is meant to be. And we looked at a passage of Scripture, and I want to read it with you again. This is what Paul wrote to this church. He says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. That has blessed me personally so much over the last 7 or 8 weeks that I've been studying this and thinking about it, because sometimes I forget who God is. I think of a day like this where we think back 20 years and you wonder, as some commentators that I heard, well, where was God in that? Well, you can get a wrong impression of God if that's the only impression of God you have. Jesus comes along and says, you want to see what God's really like? Look at me. And Paul says, that's right. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. So you got to stop there for just a second before you jump on social media and dive bomb our political leaders. Every time that you personally demean a political leader online, you're poking God in the eyes and saying, you did a terrible job letting that person come into power. You got to be so careful with that. Pray before you do it. That's what Jesus said. Pray for your leaders. Pray for them. Don't malign them. Okay, I'll go on. All things were created by him and for him. Jesus is before all things, and in him all things hold together. For he, and this is where we parked, he is the head of the body of the church, that's us. Jesus is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have preeminence forever. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through Jesus' blood shed on the cross. So if we were to take Simon Sinek's circle, this is what it would look like for us. It would be who at the very top of it, then the why, then what, then how and what. I want to take some time right now to think about who. The last sentence of what Paul writes to that church in Colossae is he talks about Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross and what that means, that it's reconciled us to God. So it's not just who Jesus is, God coming to earth and then redirecting us. No, it's Jesus, God coming to earth in a human body and then giving his life as a sacrifice so you and I could be reconciled to him. That's our story. This is us, reconciled people, redeemed people because of what Jesus has done. We cannot ever forget that. It was so important to Jesus that that not be forgotten, that the few hours before he's arrested, he gathers his friends, you know the story, in a rented room in downtown Jerusalem someplace, and he has a meal with them. And partway through the meal, he takes a glass of wine and he passes it around. He said, hey guys, I know I've never done this before and you've never heard this before, but that glass of wine that you're sipping around the table, that's symbolic of my blood that's going to be spilled in the next hours. Through beatings and through a terrible scourging and a death on a cross, my blood is going to be spilled out and I'm going to die. But you know why? Because I'm reconciling you. I'm giving you a shot to be reconciled to the Father through that. That's stunning for them to hear that. And he takes some bread and he breaks that and he says, this is a symbol of my broken body, which in the next hours is going to be broken and my life is going to be given up. Because I came here to redeem you. Now, don't miss out on it. The only way you miss out on it is to think you can self-save. Never happened. Doesn't work well. In the end, the results are not there. And Jesus comes along and he says, but I will die in your place. Don't ever forget what this is based on. It's not your good behavior. It's not your good intentions. It's not your best wishes. It's that I, the God of the universe, became a human and came into this world and gave my life horribly so you never would have to. And all those rebellious things that you've done, all those times you've pushed back on God, all those times you've gone it alone, I came to put that back together and to redeem you and to connect you to the Father. So we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to recreate that celebration that Jesus had with his friends on that Thursday night. There's some bread and some juice here at the front on both sides, and there's a table at the back. You can make your way there. And if you're at home, this is enough time for you to go to the pantry and get, I don't know, crackers and whatever you have, and like any liquid will do. Non-alcoholic probably if you're like doing that. But get something that you can participate in this. Here's how we want to do it. If you didn't get something as you came in, if you'll go to those stations around the room and take it back to your seat and hold it. Meditate, think about what Jesus has done. Butch and Lee are going to sing a song over top of that, which you can reflect on a little bit. Just a word of loving caution. If you've never had that personal encounter with Jesus where you have given up your self-saving methods and just admitted that you and God aren't connected, and you've never had that redemptive experience with Jesus where you've given your life to him and received his forgiveness and mercy, would you be willing to pass tonight? I got a better idea. Maybe tonight would be the very moment that you would want to make that connection with Jesus and thank him for what he's done. Admit you can't do it on your own and receive his mercy and his grace. And then you could take it as the first time that it's really meant that significant thing for you. So, as you guys sing, we'll prepare ourselves for it. Again, if you'll take it back to your seat, we'll do this all together.
Caught up in your presence, and I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. And oh, I'm not here for blessing. Jesus, you don't owe me anything. more than anything that you can do. Yeah, I just want you. Yeah, I just want you, and nothing else, and nothing else, and nothing else will do. Yeah, I just want you, and nothing else, no, nothing else, nothing else will do. Yeah, I just want you, and nothing else, no, nothing else, and nothing else will do. Yeah, I just want you, no, nothing else, and nothing else, Jesus, nothing else will do. Yeah, I just want you, and I just want you. Yeah, I just want you, nothing else will do. Yeah, I just want you, and I just want you. I just want you, nothing else will do. I just want you.
We even think to that moment in the Garden of Gethsemane, where you asked if it was possible for your Father to take that, what lay ahead away, that you would want that. But then you said, no, but your will be done. And it was the Father's will that you would give your life so that we could be redeemed, so we could be freed from the things that we've done and the approach we've taken to life and how we've pushed you away or just flat out disobeyed what you would have and abandoned your grace and love for us. It's a stunning thing to get to a place of just being aware of what we've done and the consequences. And then to think that you intervened in that, compelled by your love, to take our place, so death would no longer hurt us, where we would no longer live lives separated from you, no longer live independent, but live in a quiet, humble dependency on you, thrilled by your grace every day, thrilled by your mercy, amazed by your hope, delighted in your mercy for us. So we take this now, and we do this in remembrance of what you have done for us, our one and only. We love you back, Jesus. Amen. So if I could take us through kind of the rest of that pyramid of circles, this would be, if Jesus is our who, this would be our why. And you'll see it come up, and it is to the top right there, it's our why. And it's a little small, so we'll give you a bigger picture of what it says up to the right there in the next slide. You might think of this as our mission. We state it this way: we help each other increasingly be with Jesus, so we increasingly think like Jesus and are increasingly mistaken for him. Be with, think like, mistaken for. What's the thinking behind that? Well, it's really simple. If Jesus is our who, and he reconciled us to himself so that there would be nothing between us and him, that we could have a free and whole, healthy relationship with him, it would make sense that we would do increasingly, as we are aware of who he is, we would increasingly do every moment of life with him. That it wouldn't just be moments in life where we gather like we are together, but it would be every moment. We would wake up with a sense of his presence, go through the day in a sense of he's with me, go to bed at night. For the last 12 years, I've had this great joy of every morning as I wake up to either say Psalm 23 or the Lord's Prayer or this comes to my mind, humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God. In due time he'll lift you up. Cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you. And then I will say, and now Jesus, I'm going to put my feet on the floor and I want to live every moment aware of your presence in whatever I face today, whatever I face. And then every night I get to go to sleep, and almost every night I hear something like this. It's been a great day with you, Brad. I love you. Now have a good sleep. It's how it's intended to be, to live every moment with him, increasingly so, increasingly so. And here's what happens for us. As we increasingly are aware of his presence in our lives, do you know what happens? Our thinking begins to shift. And over time, we naturally, intuitively, in the moment, think like he does. Where we used to have to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, over the course of time, we realized Jesus didn't do that he had confidence, and he has confidence in us, and we're totally safe with him, that we actually think like that. Now, this takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. The more time you spend with him, aware of his presence, the more you think like him, and lo and behold, after a couple of decades, you just start to be mistaken for his nature and his character, and we want to help each other with that. There are myriads of scriptures that speak to this. I want to point out one in particular. This is taken from Peter, Jesus' friend Peter. It says about Jesus, it says, his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. Do you know what that means? It means this, that we have been given the ability to be mistaken for him because he's given us everything we need for life and godliness. It's ours already in Jesus Christ because of who he is, because of his death and resurrection. That means that we could be mistaken for him, not because we're so good, but because he, by his divine power, enables us to, and how? Through our knowledge of him. Well, you have to understand knowledge in the context. The actual word here, the Greek word for this, is not like intellectual knowledge. It's experiential knowledge. It's doing life together with someone where you get to know them. Alpha and I have been married for almost 42 years. I know her better today than the first day I saw her. I know her better than a year ago. Because we've spent so much time together, there's a knowledge that because we've shared difficult days together, joyful days together, we've celebrated and cried together, that's the knowledge that's being spoken about. So, what Peter is saying is you have the ability to be mistaken for Jesus, but you get it through your knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Next verse. Through these, he's given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature. What's that? Well, the divine nature is Jesus' nature. You actually could be mistaken for his character and his worldview and how he does life. It's possible. And escape the corruption of the world caused by evil desires. That has to do with thinking. It's how you see the world. It's how you think about things. So if you compress that a little bit, knowledge of him shifts how you think and what are desires in your heart, and then you become mistaken for him as that process of time goes on. Go on to the next one. For this very reason, I make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. Who thinks like that? Jesus thinks like that. And apparently it's possible to make an effort. Now, hold on just a second. Grace suggests no effort, right? No, it doesn't. Grace suggests no earning. Grace will always accompany effort. You don't get the grace to do this by earning something. It's involving investing, and then over time, as we are with Jesus who thinks like this, shifts our thinking to think like that as well. Let's wrap it up with this. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, now you could underline increasing measure, because the way we state our mission statement is we increasingly are with Jesus, And we increasingly think like Jesus, and we're increasingly mistaken for him, because he says if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, that's time and effort. That's relationship of knowledge. They will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge. There it is. Again, your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But if anyone does not have them, he's nearsighted and blind, doesn't think right, and has forgotten that he's been cleansed of his past sins. So we want to help each other. This is our mission. We want to help each other increasingly do all of life with Jesus, so that we increasingly think like him and are increasingly mistaken for his nature and his character and who he is in our world. Paul writes this, he says, I plead with you, I cry with you, I beg with you that you would have Christ fully formed in you. And this is what we want to be a part. So if that's the who and that's the why, what's the how? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, because I want to invite you to come this Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock to what we call Copper Hills 101. And it's an opportunity to go through in greater detail what our vision is, what our mission is, how we got started, all the history of who we are. If you've never been to that, I really encourage you. You might have been here a number of years, but you haven't been there. Come to be part of that. Maybe you're new to Copper Hills. Maybe you're checking out Copper Hills. Make that as strong as I can encourage you, make that part of your evening. So that's Wednesday evening from 7 to 9. Here's the deal. If you're a family that have young children, and we know that that's a challenging night to take your kids out one more night during the week. So if you hire a babysitter, I'll pay for it. That's how much I want you to be there, okay? So just send me the bill. Tell me what it is. If it, hopefully it's under $1,000, I hope, right? But we really want to encourage you to be there. You can register at copperhills.org events, and we'll make sure that you get signed up for that. So here's a little bit of what the how is for us. And it's a bit of a process that we think about. If we're going to increasingly think like Jesus, we don't all think the same way about Jesus, right? So if you can put up the circle, if you've got that, that would be great. There it is. So we think that there are some people who don't think about Jesus at all. They're doubters, they're skeptics and cynics. Well, you know what we want for them? We want them to increasingly think about Jesus. In most cases, they're going to think about Jesus based on who they see you and me to be. But if we're mistaken for Jesus, they're going to start to think well of Jesus. We also think there are some people who are exploring. They were doubters, they were skeptics, they were cynics, but now they're exploring and they're looking for answers. Guess who they get the answers from? You and me. As we have connections with them at work and at school and in the neighborhood and places where we play. That's how we help them increasingly think like Jesus, because they're increasingly getting to know him. And then there are others that have that personal encounter. They're growing, they get closer, and then they're centered in Jesus. We'll talk more about it Wednesday. So if that's our who and our why and our how, what's our what? Well, some years ago, I happened to be reading a passage from John chapter 4, and if you've been around Copper Hills for any length of time, you have heard the story. It's a story of a woman who has a really difficult place in life. It's taken from John chapter 4, as I said, and she has got some significant relationship struggles in her world. Things have not gone as she expected as a young girl of what her dream life would be. She probably dreamt that she would find just that right guy, and they would have a family together, and they would become grandparents, and they would just be a generation of good things that went on. But someplace along the way, she got married, and that marriage either didn't work out or her husband died. Now, in our culture, that's seen a little differently than in her culture. If she was divorced, she would have been shamed and shunned, and she would not have had the privileges and blessings that the culture might have offered her because she had done something terribly wrong. If her husband had died and there wasn't a network to provide for her and care for her, she was in a really bad place to be able to just survive in that kind of world. And you would think, if that happens one time, that's a tragedy. For her, it happens 4 more times. And so she just gives up on marriage. She says, I'm not doing that again. And she moves in with a guy. And then she goes to a well one day, like she had done every other day of her life. She went to a well that had actually been built 2,000 years earlier, and for 2,000 years it had provided water for the community. So she went looking for water for her animals, for her family, whatever it was. She had done this repeatedly. And this was just going to be one more day. Now, she goes at noon, not in the cool part of the day. She goes at noon likely because of the embarrassment and the shame and dishonor. She didn't want to face the catcalls again. Well, this particular day, somebody else is at the well, a guy. It's Jesus. He's headed from Jerusalem up to the northern part of Israel, to his northern headquarters, and he stops there, sends his friends off about half a mile or so, third of a mile to town to get some lunch, and he sits there. And he engages this woman in a conversation. He takes notice of her, and then he takes interest. That's simple. And they begin a conversation, and because Jesus is so insightful and compassionate and kind because of who he is, but again, we're increasingly spending time with him, and we're increasingly thinking like him, and we're increasingly mistaken for him, and we can do the kinds of things that he did over the course of some time too as we live with him. He engages her in a conversation, a really personal conversation with somehow or other, there's got to be more to this conversation than was recorded. They come to the subject matter of her relational strife. And Jesus doesn't condemn her, and he doesn't look at her like other people in the community had or other men looked at her. And she feels validated, and she feels affirmed, she feels loved, and it opens up her heart to talk about some of the deeper things in her world and her life. And through the course of that, she realizes that Jesus alone must have some answers for life. Something happens inside of her in that conversation. It's not recorded for us what it is. But at some point in the conversation, she runs back to town, the place where she probably was shunned and ridiculed and marginalized, and she says, I met someone. And I want to invite you all to come with me. Come to the well. And I want to introduce you to Jesus. And I guess they were interested enough in what she said that they did. And they came out to the well where Jesus was, and for the afternoon, they must have conversed together and talked together. And they asked Jesus to stay for 2 more days. And he does. He changes his travel plans, and he's there for 2 days with them. At the end of it, they say this wonderful thing. You know, we had heard from her, but now we have encountered you ourselves. When that story became prominent for me, I couldn't stop talking about it because that's what I do. I talk a lot. And it had such an impact on me that we began to think about what would it look like? What would it look like to be a church community that was like that well, where people could come and would be attracted and would be compelled to come to something that isn't necessarily a church environment, but it's a place where they would come for a need or a want or something that would be fulfilling for their personal lives. And then when they're there, they would rub up against somebody who thinks like, because they've spent life with Jesus and they are mistaken for him, and they would have conversations that might lead them to a place of understanding who Jesus is. It might be a long time, might not happen all the time, but what would it look like to be that kind of a church? And then we bought this property. And we decided we're going to build something here that is a well in our community. So I went to every civic leader who would give me half an hour of their time. And I said, what could we build? And after a variety of suggestions and ideas, everybody kind of said the same thing. Why don't you build something in the community that would be centered on the arts? Because every time there's a downturn in the economy, schools cancel their arts programs and mom and pop art studios close down because they can't manage it any longer. And there's just no permanence to where people can express their arts. And we thought that works. Because what if we could be that church that would teach a little boy or a girl or teenager how to play the piano for 13 weeks, and they would sit with someone who loves Jesus more than they love their craft. And through the course of that 13-week semester, there would be conversations that are intentionally stepped into, that we could see a need and then take interest in it, and maybe if it was appropriate at the time to pray with that child or to hear a little more of what's going on and maybe direct them to the one who knows their lives and gave his life for them. What if that could happen? And so we started something we call Center for the Arts, and we built a building around it. It's just on the other side of that studio. You heard some of our teachers lead tonight. And it's just amazing the stories that happen in the lives of, well, adults and students, but children as well, of just how Jesus has reached them through a teacher who loves Jesus more than their craft, but they're really good at their craft, and then they share that with a student. It isn't just they're learning music and dance and technology and robotics, and they're discovering, they're beginning to think about Jesus. And it's amazing what happened. And then we said, well, what else draws people to like a well, like in the first century? We realized coffee does that. Oh, yeah. And so we built a first-class coffee shop that would be open 7 days a week, that we could be an anchor spot in our community where people could come, do work, do whatever they're doing, but hang out in an environment served by baristas and staff who love Jesus more than they love coffee, which is hard to imagine, right? Yes, but they do. And again, the lives that have been impacted through that. That's just part of it. This is us. We have people in our church family who think in that kind of way in wonderful ways. You know that every Wednesday there's a group of ladies that gather here to make meals as part of the Joy Bus organization in our city, but they will bring bulk meals that have been cooked by a fantastic chef, and they'll dole those out into private individual servings, and then they're taken to cancer patients in our community in the name of Jesus. They're loved that way. It's a way of reaching into somebody's life and going, we see your need, we're taking interest, and we're going to serve you there in Jesus' name. It's amazing what happens. I just met someone last week who owns a private aircraft. You know what he does with his private aircraft? He flies blood plasma to different parts of our state, far distant places where you can't get to really quickly. Why does he do that? Because he loves people in Jesus' name. It's a wonderful example of that. We have a group of 12 young men who are going to be part of what we have called the Academy of 12. They have committed 3 years of their lives to be nurtured and discipled and learn together how to increasingly be mistaken for Jesus in the world. 3 years of intensive study and experience, mission experiences, and so on. That's part of that well mentality of being that in our community. I think of a young lady in our church who teaches or coaches girls volleyball because she wants to have an influence for Jesus in that place. Just this morning, a group of us went to West Wing School, and we served the school there. They had a few needs that we could easily take care of for them. And one of the people that was part of our group this morning is a guy by the name of Bruce. I first met Bruce about 24 and a half years ago. When we first moved to town, we didn't know anybody, Alfie and my three children and myself. And so we went, believe it or not, we went door to door to introduce ourselves to the community. And we said, hey, we're starting a church in the community and wondering if you are currently part of a church. If you are, what do you love about your church? If not, why do you think people don't go? We got educated. It was a wonderful experience. Very intimidating, but wonderful. So one of the doors I knocked on, the guy opens it up, but he won't open the screen door. He's just looking at me through the screen door. And to this day, he says, you asked whether or not you could do church in my home. I never said that. But that's, so you can understand he didn't open the door, right? Like, who says yes to something like that? About 3 years later, a gentleman walked in the back door with his wife and his newborn child, and it was him. It was Bruce. I said, how did you find your way here? And then he recognized me. He says, you're the guy on the other side of that door. I said, yeah, I'm the guy. He said, well, we came here looking for a babysitter for our child. We think if someone goes to the church, they're probably a good babysitter. Through the course of that, we had a conversation beside a well. And he began to move from not thinking about Jesus. He became an explorer, and he was asking these questions about Jesus and who Jesus was. And I had the opportunity to walk with him and show him and teach him. And then he gave his life to Jesus, and he began to serve here. And he's moved to other cities and served in those places and started ministries in different places. Because it just makes a difference when you think of yourself as someone who could be used as a well. I could tell you story after story of how that makes a difference. And each one of us get the opportunity every single day where we work, where we play, where we live, and where we go to school, to be that, to help people move from not thinking to exploring, to growing, to being centered on Jesus as a whole. The more time that they spend with Jesus, the more they think like him, and they ultimately become mistaken for him. And we all play a role in that. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a couple of stories of how the Center for the Arts and the Well Coffee Shop has impacted people. And take a look at this.
I was first introduced to Well actually by Google, and so I typed it into Google even further to actually see what the web page was like, and I saw a church. So I actually had all three of my kids, and it was just beautiful. But the customer service, when I walked in, I remember meeting Kevin for the very first time and just kind of seeing him, the way that he navigated the place and the way that he interacted with customers. And I think from that day that I came in here that first time, I was here going forward for the next 6 months, 6 days a week. Every morning I'd come in here with my twins for sure, sometimes with all three kids for probably 3 hours a day. I was studying, had my twins with me, continued to just study and be able to chat with people inside the coffee shop and kind of network and build relationships, and even the further relationship with the workers that were there. It's like every time that I came in there, it was like a home. Just so much positivity constantly being poured into me that I wasn't even going there for that. I was going there to study, but building those relationships over time. And I remember always going back home and seeing my wife, and I was like, this place is amazing, this place is amazing. And I'd bring her there a few times, and she's built relationships now. And so it's almost like our whole family has just built this lasting relationship that when we come here, like, we don't want to go to another coffee shop. Those are coffee shops. This is a home. Like, this is a place where you come. It's the Well. This is where people gather, and this is where we come and we have relationships. We share life and we do life, and that's what you see people doing. I've been coming here for 2 years as a customer, and now we're coming here as a family, to church service just recently. And hearing this last weekend's message kind of hit me pretty hard, because it made me kind of flash back to coming to the Well. And I remember I would come in here on some Wednesday mornings at 6 a.m. and I would see a group of older gentlemen around the big table. And they were always like pouring into each other, reading the Bible and encouraging each other and educating each other and building each other up. And for me, it was just like always seeing that, I was like, I want that. And then to hear the pastor this weekend when we came here, to hear him say that, I was just like, man, like, we are home. Like, this is where we're kind of supposed to be right now.
I first learned about the Center of the Arts through mutual friends on Instagram, and I was looking for uplifting dance classes for my girls, and my son is super into robotics, and he also takes piano. So when I found that all of these classes were being offered in one place, I was really excited. Our experience this summer at dance camp was super inviting and encouraging. Miss Angie was so sweet. She would speak these encouraging words to my daughter and all the other little girls. They would come home every day with a new craft or a new art project that they would do, and it would have a Bible verse, or they would learn something about Jesus. So I picked up Ella from dance camp one day, and we were getting in the car, and she started telling me about what they learned and what they did and dance that day. And she told me, she's like, Mommy, when we dance, it's not just dancing to get attention. It's actually, we're using our body that God gave us. So we're actually dancing for Jesus. It made me feel good as a mom that she would be growing up learning that the way she danced was really to glorify God and not to try to just draw attention to herself, that she would be thankful that she had a healthy body, that she could move and just worship God. It drew us to the church because it was just a beautiful campus, and we just wanted somewhere close by. We wanted something that my kids could make friends and actually live semi-close so they could continue that friendship. And also the children's program was pretty amazing. What the children's pastor briefly told us when we were picking up the kids the first time. So I really want a church that my kids can grow and learn and just build friendships with. We had gone to a pretty large church before, and I really just love the smaller, intimate church feeling where you recognize people each weekend. And so that was one of the big criterias for me. We're here at Copper Hill because of our experience at the Center for the Arts.